Hello and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. I'm your host, Lynnaire Johnston. Thank you so much for joining us wherever in the world you are today. Now, to say that I'm excited about today's live is a little bit of an understatement because I'm going to be talking with someone who just personifies charisma. And that's why we're talking about developing creativity, content, and connection here on LinkedIn, among a whole bunch of other things. Now, we're joined from people from Scott's network, from ours. So please do say hello in the comments and say hello to each other and network in the comments as well. Our team members, Cher and Jilly, are looking after the comments for us today. And so if you want to say hello to us, we'll put a comment on the screen for you as well. Now, if you're new to me, I live and breathe LinkedIn. I have written 2 books. I work with clients internationally to help them use LinkedIn to achieve professional success. I run the membership site Linkability.biz. I produce far too much content on and about LinkedIn, and I hold LinkedIn Lives either weekly or fortnightly. We also do LinkedIn audios. So if you are not connected to me or not following me, please do reach out. Now, we are welcoming your questions today. Please do pop in any questions, any comments that you have into the chat, and we will put them up on the screen. Hi, Mark. It's really nice to see you here today. Now, why are we talking about this subject today? I'd like to give you some context, if I may. Now, we're all facing challenges on LinkedIn. There's no doubt about that. Organic reach is down, fewer new people are following or connecting to us, and in an ocean of AI, being seen as authentic is becoming crucial. There's no question it's becoming more challenging to reach the right audience, to grow your network, promote your business, or secure that promotion. Now, whatever your reason for being on LinkedIn, and no matter the challenges, there are ways to get yourself in front of the right people. And once in front of them, there are ways to grab their attention and showcase your talent, abilities, and experience. Now, this can take a bit of courage. There's still a fear around peeping above the parapet or appearing boastful or too full of yourself. Yet, if we want to stand out, we can't do so by standing in the shadows or being in the background. Rather, the reverse. We need to be bold, and we need to be bold in a way that's professionally acceptable. But most of us don't find this easy, which is why we've invited 2 times TEDx speaker and former corporate lawyer Scott Mason to join our live today to talk about developing creativity, content, and connection on LinkedIn. Now, as you will soon find out, Scott inspires, excites, and engages, which is why he's in demand as a transformational coach and keynote speaker. But to think that that's all there is to Scott would be to seriously underestimate him. Known as the Myth Slayer, Scott is the host of the Webdelics podcast about plant medicine and mental health. He's in the New York City Bar Association, and like me, he's published several books. You can check all of this out on his LinkedIn profile. But that's not all either. And Scott's going to share some of his personal story with us today. But before I bring Scott on, I want to mention how it is that I know him. We have a mutual friend in Mark Halpert, who's in our audience today. And Mark's a clever photographer. He's an inspiring writer. And like me, he's a gardener. Oh, and he also knows a thing or two about LinkedIn. He's an expert in the professional services sector, and he's a previous guest on our lives. Now, Mark is a generous referrer. He's always putting people together, and a few years ago, he introduced me to Scott. Scott and I hit it off right away, but have been out of personal touch for some time. COVID will tend to do that to you. But very recently, I spotted in my LinkedIn feed a post from Mark sharing Scott's latest TEDx talk. I watched it straight away and was just bowled over. I sent him a DM right away and to invite him to join me as a guest. He accepted and he's here today. So that is proof of the power of LinkedIn to bring people together to share ideas, experiences, thoughts and opinions. And are we going to hear a few of those today? It gives me great pleasure to introduce Scott Mason to you all. Hello, Scott, and a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. And I have to say hello to Yolanda and David, who have said hi, and to give an additional shout out to Mark Halpert. You're one of my favorite people, Lynnaire, and that is because of another one of my favorite people here on LinkedIn, Mark.
He is an amazing person, and I just love it. Anytime I see him pop up in my Messenger or LinkedIn feed or my LinkedIn, in my emails, he's everywhere. He's just everywhere for me, and he's just amazing. He's just an amazing person. So let's get started. And I want to invite anybody who wants to add questions to our chat today, and we can pick them up as we go along or answer them at the end, depending on where they all fit in. But I want to start with the basics, Scott, and that is, what is charisma? Tell us your definition of it so that we've got a good understanding of what it is, so how we can see how it fits into LinkedIn.
I'm glad you framed that question exactly the way that you did. Charisma is one of those terms that everyone seems to have their own definition of. So for the purposes of this conversation, except to the extent that we shifted a little bit, and I'll explain what I mean by that, I'm going to recommend that we stick with the following definition: the ability to command attention in order to achieve a positive outcome. The ability to command attention in order to achieve a positive outcome. Now, there is nuance within that definition, as any broadly applicable definition of anything in any circumstance has. But what it explicitly excludes, and we can have either as part of this discussion or hopefully it's irrelevant to everyone in our audience, or if it is as part of a different discussion, I am distinguishing it from dark charisma, which is when you are intentionally manipulating people in order to achieve an outcome that is intentionally destructive. So the ability to command attention for a positive outcome is fundamental to the definition of charisma that we'll be discussing as we go forward this evening.
Okay, because I think that it's important that the positive nature of charisma be emphasized, given this is LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
And we want to see positivity on LinkedIn. And in fact, it's one of the reasons I love LinkedIn so much, is it is a positive platform. People are rarely negative, at least the people that I see in my network, fortunately. And I just really enjoy the fact that people are here because they want to help. They want to learn, they want to share, they want to get to know people, and for all the right reasons. So I can really see why charisma would really work on LinkedIn. But tell us from your perspective why you think people need to have charisma, because it must be fair, we don't all have it. And sometimes I think we have it in some situations and we don't in others. And so I'd like to hear why you think we should all have charisma, or do we all have it? Do we all have it? That should be a better question.
We'll start with that. We all have the capability of exhibiting charisma. There are those that say either you have charisma, or you do not. I will stick a flag at the top of the mountaintop that says that is untrue. To some extent, I'd even say it's a lie. We all have it within us. Now, do we have the tools to be able to express it? Do we have the confidence to be able to express it? Do we take the internal risks that are needed in order to be charismatic? The answer to that, tragically, is no. Do we prioritize it? Do we show up as embodiments of charisma? to the detriment of so many professional lives and to the detriment of those who could benefit from knowing about, being captivated by those that have charisma? The answer to those questions is no. But all of us, every single person who is watching this, listening to it, who will watch it, listen to it in the future, or who isn't here at all of you have it within you. And one of my missions in life is to ensure that everyone is able to bring it out.
I love that. All right. So what we're going to talk about is bringing it out. But can I start with the fact that, do we know whether we have it? Is it knowing that you have charisma something that is something that you know innately, or is it something that you have to learn that you've got? Or do you just not think that you don't have it, could never have it, and don't bother with it? I think a lot of introverts might think they don't have charisma, for example.
Yeah. And we can and we should talk about introversion and charisma. It's a big issue, and it's something actually I work with people on and talk about a lot. So, Charlene mentioned something that I believe is a great way to begin responding to that question. Do we all have it? Or do you know if you have it? Charlene says, could the shadow side of charisma be called narcissistic? Many people that are highly narcissistic believe they have charisma when really they may have something that looks like it, but is not actually that. Narcissism is, in one way or another, the imposition of the self out into the world at the expense of other identities in a way that is pathological. So if you are able to express yourself passionately or excitedly, but it's ultimately for your own ends, which is not positive, I would argue that for the purposes of this discussion, you may have something that looks like charisma. You may have loudness. You may have bigness. You may be dramatic, but that doesn't make you charismatic. What's lacking with that is the impact outside of the self, unless it is a destructive one. So people may think that they have charisma, or they may have something that looks like charisma, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they do. If you have charisma naturally, or you've chosen to develop it, many times you will know, simply because you can observe, if you have any self-awareness at all, how people react to you, or people tell you. If people say all the time, you're super charismatic, maybe you are. If no one in your entire life has told you that you are charismatic, chances are you're probably not. People don't tend to keep that sort of thing a secret. If you are introverted, or if you are someone who may not express yourself in a dramatic, big personality way, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are not charismatic and that you cannot be charismatic. Charisma and becoming charismatic involves, above and beyond anything else, as a first step, the ability to shatter your myths about what charisma is. Charisma isn't just, as I mentioned and hinted at a little bit ago, but didn't maybe directly say, it's not just having a big, loud personality. It's not merely being entertaining. A one-hit wonder on the Billboard Hot 100 here in the United States may be entertaining, may put on a good show, but if you forget about it, or if it has no impact in your life or the life of anyone else outside of just diversion, you're not charismatic. You're merely entertaining. You can tell sometimes if you are not charismatic if people forget what you say a lot, if people forget who you are, or if when you talk or write, you're finding that people are skipping you, or they sit there and they listen, but they don't seem to have absorbed anything that you said. If you are at a live networking meeting and you stand up, and this happened to someone that I know, and it was tragic because he deserved better for himself. If you're standing up every week at a networking meeting and people, the minute they see you stand, whip out their phone and start looking down, or suddenly start eating their breakfast, or all begin to stare out the window, if when you're done talking, people have no questions or engagement at all, the chances are charisma is something that you need to develop. In addition, if you are someone who believes that your words and the words alone that you put out, if we're in a speaking setting, are enough to capture anyone's attention, the chances are you are not charismatic, because you're not fulfilling one of the core charismatic components, which is connection of the brain to the heart. So you can know if you're charismatic or not, but sometimes you may think that you're charismatic when really you're just dramatic or a narcissist.
Or in my case, just loud.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'll just use one final example here. I once read about a partner at a law firm that went around the hallway screaming, and he had a baseball bat, and he'd, just carry it to sort of threaten and intimidate people. Well, that's loud. That's dramatic. That's exciting. That gets attention. But I don't think anyone would say that stomping around screaming with a baseball hat in or baseball bat in your hand makes you truly charismatic.
No, I think that might send you straight to jail, really. Not even All right, so we've established that charisma is something that we do need to develop. Have you got some tips for us on how to develop it? And I assume that this is something that you teach as well.
Yes, I have a program called the Charismatic Olympian Program, and it is an extensive, comprehensive program to analyze why someone is not as charismatic as they want to be, and then getting them there. There are some mindset things that I mentioned, and then there are a few more tactical, practical things. So let's start with the mindset things. First of all, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, you need to shatter your stereotypes about what charisma is. If you are an introvert and you think, as we've discussed a few times already, that charisma is the same as being loud and dramatic, you need to shatter that myth and look inside and begin to think about, with the assistance of someone who can help you, ways in which you can leverage your introversion in order to be charismatic. I once had a friend of mine who's in her mid-70s. I'm 6'1", and I am a robustly built person with a loud voice. She's a petite mid-70s something person who's also just, her bone structure is small. How can I be charismatic like you? You don't be charismatic like me. You shatter the myths that you need to be like someone else to be charismatic, so that you can become charismatic as you. So that's number one. Number two, focus on connecting the brain to the heart when you speak. The brain is providing a clear, motivational, or inspirational message with an actionable call to behave in one way or another. The heart is connected to the message, expressing emotion with its full range in a way that is actually relevant to the words. So connection of brain to heart with a clear, concise message and call to action, as well as an expression of the entire range of emotions, not just the ones that you're comfortable with expressing. And then finally, from a mindset perspective, never, ever look back. Once you've settled into who and what you are, that's who you are. Run with it. Go for it. Yes, there may be minor tweaks to your technique that you want to engage in as you go forward, but Don't look back just because you suddenly get insecure or because someone tells you that they don't like the way that you're presenting. My speaking style, I am the first to concede, is extraordinarily divisive. Some people love it. Thankfully, one of them is you.
Yeah.
Some people hate it. When I had that TEDx talk that you just showed on screen released, people called me up or texted me just to say how much they hated the way that I presented or how much I needed to change. Other people loved it. As I think about what those who felt the need, literally one person I hadn't had a conversation with in probably 2 years, saw that and felt the need to call me on a Saturday night to say, these are the things you need to change. Unsolicited. When you get that sort of feedback, my advice actually is to double down on it. That's who you are. That's triggering a reaction. Moving into practical, tactical steps. First of all, do an assessment that is as objective as possible of your charisma. So what you want to do is record yourself speaking, whether it's on video or live or whatever, over and over and over again, and then look at what you do well. Don't focus on ums and ahs and filler words and whether you stammer and this, that, and the other. Focus on what you do well, because those are the things that you want to lean into, and then get feedback from other people. Immerse yourself in speakers who you want to be like, and accept who and what you are. Some people are quieter in their charisma. Some people are loud and boisterous. Some people are highly varied. Some people have problems pronouncing words. Some people stumble over their words. Some people use a lot of SAT words. Some people are very simple in their approach. Some people automatically go deep. Some are shallow. Some are theatrical. Some can actually be charismatic by being wooden if they play their cards right. Look at what your charismatic gems are and water them. And then finally, take risks. When you feel afraid to express or be something, particularly with regards to emotion and sometimes humor, say, I'm going to dive into that. It may or may not work, but part of being charismatic is busting over and over beyond the walls that keep you from fully, explosively, in a way that's right for you, expressing and connecting. I used to speak in a monotone, Lynnaire, boring, bureaucratic, and dull, as you may have figured out. After a lot of practice and hard work, fear and insecurity, I shifted my approach.
Very glad you did, because it sounds amazing. And you've got a fabulous voice, and I must listen to your podcast, because I think they will be. Because I like your voice, and I do really believe that voices are part of charisma. And if you've got a voice that appeals to people, then they will listen, right? And sometimes it is about the voice, and sometimes it's about the message. And if the message is strong enough but the voice isn't, people will stick with it. So I do think that the two are connected. But I love your cadence, I think is the word I would use. And I do hope that you hung up on that person who thought he had, or they had the right to tell you that you needed to change. Now, I want to move on to leadership and charisma, because we would normally think that leaders need charisma to be successful. So that's the first question. Do they need to have charisma to be successful as a leader?
No, they do not, but with a massive caveat. They may not need it due to having other things that will enable people to follow them. So I have been putting up on LinkedIn a series of 5 very short videos looking at various political and business leaders and asking whether they are charismatic Olympians. And one of them was Nancy Pelosi. My verdict about Nancy Pelosi was that she is not a charismatic Olympian. As someone in the comments said, well, she has a lot of money, that's why people follow her. And one-on-one, she can be charming. Fine. And then some other people said, well, she's been pretty doggone successful at getting her agenda done. Well, yes, that's true. But what if she didn't have that money? What if you were not living in one of the most affluent areas in all of California? What if you were like me, born and raised in the backwoods of Kansas? You wouldn't have had access to that money. So what do you have to rely on? But let's also think about possibility. Charisma and why it's important is not just about what you have or what you have done. It is about creating possibility. Imagine if, in addition to all of her money and the influence that can buy and how it helped her along the way, imagine if she had charisma on top of it, what she could have done. She could have taken over the world. Think about Martin Luther King Jr., arguably the most charismatic American of the past century. He didn't have money. He came from the segregated South. If he didn't have charisma, he'd have nothing. But because he had charisma, he was able to build everything. So you don't need it. You may also just have authority in your office, like the lawyer who was a partner at this firm I read about, walking around with a baseball bat. You may have the ability to terrorize. You may have physical strength. All of those things may help you be successful. You may even have a good voice that, by the way, you underleverage or abuse. All of those things can take you to a certain place and make you seem successful, but I'm about optimizing success. Your homie here, Lynnaire, believes that we have an ethical obligation to be the most that we can in this world. And so anytime you're not leveraging charisma, you're not fulfilling that obligation.
Love that too. All right, let's take charisma onto LinkedIn now, because that's my area, the thing I love most, and Mark Halpett's big on that too, and several other people who are in the audience today. So let's talk about charisma on LinkedIn. Now, one of the problems that we're facing at the moment is the challenge of AI. And so the whole authenticity angle is subject to a whole lot of revision at present, because one of the few ways that people can know that you are authentic is what we're doing here right now, right? We're both showing up here, we're having a conversation, we're talking live, and people are listening live. They know that that's authentic. But they can also read posts on LinkedIn that could have just been created by ChatGPT. Now, this morning, I wrote a post for our company page, our Linkability company page, that was the product of ChatGPT. I'd done an interview recently with someone else. I put it through ChatGPT and said, what are the 15 most important tips that came out of this? And it came up with these tips, and I put that in there. But I did state that it was from ChatGPT. So I'm not trying to pretend that it was something that I had produced or that we had produced as a team. So that kind of authenticity, I think, is going to make, or lack of it, is going to make inroads into what we're doing on LinkedIn. It's going to lessen trust. It's going to make it harder to build relationships, I think. And so I'm interested to see what you think that we can do to be able to use charisma to overcome the barrier of this declining authenticity on LinkedIn.
Let's start with writing, and then we'll get to a bigger picture than that. First of all, when it comes to writing, look, ChatGPT, I'm going to keep it real. Some people, as much effort as they put into writing, are just not going to be able to do it in a way that reflects well on them professionally. They just might not be able to get the spelling right. They might not be good proofreaders. I'm not the best proofreader in the world. I have to read everything like 10 times to make sure that it's okay. It's irritating. For some people like that, ChatGPT may be an improvement, because particularly if it is their own thinking, look, at least they're going to be able to express things in a way that people can read, or at least that has some semblance to something other than just a horrible, hackneyed, professionally disgraceful way of presenting yourself. And I say that with empathy to those folks. These tools are valuable for that. Others who are looking to really stand out, to really be thought leaders, to be on the cutting edge, or to develop the sort of human connections that I believe are not going anywhere because they're a fundamental human need. You're going to need to be very, very careful about how you're utilizing these tools. ChatGPT is beginning to get to a place where it can kind of imitate your written voice. But one of the things that can make you stand out from a writing perspective, and in order to be charismatic as a writer, is, in my opinion, making sure that you are thinking about how can I truly surprise the reader with turns of phrase that are unusual, with words that might not be ordinary, with phrasing, or with personal stories, or with your own twist of stories that ChatGPT can't replicate. So I am in the process of writing a 4-book series retelling Greek myths as business lessons. Why am I sure that ChatGPT will not be able to replicate my voice? Because I'm going out of my way to make it all of these retellings in a post-apocalyptic sci-fi setting with very specific machinery and equipment and mixes of the ancient and the old, and an entire invented history of this alternative universe where the Greek gods and goddesses live and interact with mortals just like they would have in ancient Greek myths. And ChatGPT is not going to be able to do that to meet my inner vision and in my own voice. That's an extreme example, but there are a zillion ways that if we each sit back and say, how can I be clever and creative? How can I use ChatGPT as a way to elevate my thinking and my connection with my audience through writing? You actually can be potentially well positioned. So that's purely writing. But let's face it, LinkedIn is a social media channel, and like every social media channel, it has embraced a wide range of ways to get audience attention. For instance, there are static images. Those can be easily manipulated with AI that people may or may not pay attention to. After a while, I think that unless that AI is really well done and often tweaked by a very smart graphic designer, so it's really a mix of a human eye and something like Midjourney, then AI can become very boring. But the static images that you put up can actually be a place for charisma. I have hired and brought on an art director who does almost all of my static images for me. And it's so bold and it's so unique and it's so clearly not generated purely by Midjourney or DALL-E or something like that. It stands out. So when it comes to graphic images, particularly on LinkedIn, you get a lot of stuff that is very, very obviously dull, drab, boring, unimaginative. Well, stretch. Use that again as an opportunity to pull out your creativity. We all have it in us. We might deny that, but we all do. And then when it comes to video, that's where you really can be creative. And that's where this probably was going all along. Practice on video. Everything that I said about charisma applies even more in a video context. Now, you don't want to necessarily present the same on video as you do on a big stage or in a conference or something like that. So you want to make sure that you practice enough to be able to tailor your presentation to the medium through which you're speaking. But let's face it, if you want to stand out, having charisma on video, nothing works better than that. But nothing is more disastrous than the opposite. And think if I were to just be sitting here talking like this and answering your questions. And hi, this is my smile. Are you going to scroll by that? Yes. But if I'm saying, and Lynnaire, that's what you do. You can't back down. At least people might look twice.
Yeah, and that's what you're doing with video. You're stopping the scroll. And with the new video feed that's just starting to roll out now, there's even more reason to make sure that you can stop the scroll. And you need to do that with your voice or some action or whatever it is you might be wanting to do to get across your message. You have to stand out. And I believe that video is the way to be doing that on LinkedIn. You know, I was looking through some stats for the last 3 months of our posts and how well they had been doing last night. And the major metric that I work on is engagement, right? Because I don't really care how many news feeds LinkedIn puts my posts into. What I care about is who's making a comment, who's engaging with my content, and the kind of things that they're saying, and whether they're new to me or whether they're someone that is always is a supporter and always does make a comment. And I was really surprised to see that right up near the top of the different formats that we put content into, video was high when it comes to the engagement rate. Now, I do a lot of videos about my garden, Scott. I stand out in my garden, or I'm standing out by my pots on the deck or whatever, and I'll talk about gardening and I'll talk about LinkedIn in the same sentence, certainly in the same video anyway. And I use my gardening as an analogy for LinkedIn often. And I'm always surprised, because not everybody's interested in gardening. Although I don't know why, but not everybody's interested in gardening. But they do seem to watch the posts because they're a little different from most things. I try to tell a story about my garden or what's going on. And I think that you were spot on when you talked about storytelling with charisma, because I think that ChatGPT can be wonderful in so many different ways, and it certainly is improving very, very fast. But it can't tell your stories.
Yeah.
It doesn't know your experience. It hasn't lived your life. It doesn't know how you feel about the things that have happened to you. And that, I think, is where we can achieve well on LinkedIn, is by telling those stories in a way that is authentic and honest, and shares the good and the bad, because isn't that what being authentic is all about? Not just talking about how wonderful you are and all the fabulous things that you've achieved, but telling about the problems that you had to get to that point and what you had to do to overcome them. And I think that it's really important to do that. And you couch a lot of your videos in terms of the Greek myths. So I would like to move on to your personal story. But first of all, I would like you to just talk about the Greek myths, because I think you do with the Greek myths what I do with gardening and LinkedIn. So tell me, and I think it is worth noting for people who haven't yet seen your TEDx presentation, that it is about a Greek myth, and it is about somebody who is in a Greek myth that you have already mentioned. And so it's really entertaining and well worth having a watch if you haven't seen it. And I know that we've put the link of that into the chat. But how did you get to Greek myths from being a corporate lawyer, Scott? I mean...
Yeah, like what on earth happened? By the way, before I get to that, I want to talk to you, the audience, very, very briefly about what you said with regards to video and standing out. It's also a place, in my opinion, to have some fun. And there was a video snippet, I think it's probably all of 15 seconds, that, again, I worked on with my art director. It literally showed me in my jacket on what appeared to be a motorcycle, except this motorcycle had no wheels. It was literally floating in the air with an electric light coming underneath it. It was a hovercraft from the future. And the video was me getting off of this and walking into a speaking engagement, right? Like, that's the sort of thing where you can mix artificiality and AI and special effects and all that sort of stuff and still get attention, but it's authentic, because people watching that are like, oh, you know, that's totally fake. Scott is not riding around New York City in a flying hovercraft motorcycle thing. But that's true to who he is inside. And so going as to that goes as to also how I moved into Greek myths. There is a curse from the gods that was put upon LinkedIn early in its life. And this curse, people have been fighting to resist for years. It was like Pandora herself came into LinkedIn, somehow stepped into the digital atmosphere, opened her box, and this curse has plagued us forever. It is called the curse of being exactly like everyone else. It is the curse of the drab. And it's not just a matter of how we present and speak and put our posts up, but it is as to what we are standing for, what we're representing. It's my belief that we are all, in the entire history of this universe, unique, once in a cosmic history phenomenon. Think about this. The universe is how many billions of years old, and it's going to be lasting for trillions of years, and it is more expansive than anything. And yet there is only one Lynnaire Johnston in this world. There is only one Lynnaire Johnston in this solar system. There is only one Lynnaire Johnston in the entire history of our cosmos. There is no one like you. And so part of what I was determined to do was fight back against this sea of sameness, against wasting the opportunity to present the way that we do on LinkedIn, which is our one chance, especially during the pandemic, which is when I first went on, to really show the world who and what we are by being anything other than the truly unique person that I am. And Greek myths were something that touched me when I was a little boy. They've stayed with me my entire life. I have a Greek god avatar that has been my North Star ever since I was a kid. So when it came to thinking about what I wanted to represent, how I could translate my message, how I could even find the roots of my message, what I was obsessed with and had been obsessed with my entire life, what had been my North Star was inevitable. If you're, let's say, a marketing consultant, and you feel like, I'm afraid to present what's unique out there because the public just wants to hear what they want to hear, you're hurting yourself. If you really can find a way to bring in gardening with your LinkedIn coaching, I say more power to you, because you know what? People are going to say, oh, Lynnaire, isn't she the one from New Zealand who does the gardening stuff? A coach that I worked with, a creative manager that I had for a while, was at a networking group in another state when he mentioned that he was working with XYZ person, and he described me, and he mentioned, he described my physical, the way I looked and sort of the way I presented. And then someone said, wait a minute, is that the guy that talks about Greek myths? He was like, yes. She was like, I know exactly who that is. Lynnaire, I have no idea who this person was. He mentioned her name. I have no idea who this person was, but I stood out. And so why did I choose this? Because it was true to who I am. And I'm the only person out here that in my niche was talking about this. And that meant I was having that chance to not be forgotten, to have my individuality expressed on this unique platform in this unique place and time in the history, not to be over dramatic, but it's true, of the entire universe.
I really like that idea, because people won't remember your name necessarily, but they will remember that odd thing about you. And if you do have something that's a little bit different, I think you do stand out. When I began on LinkedIn, the fact that I was a Kiwi stood out, but that doesn't anymore. And so the gardening thing, because it's a bit like, it's to me like your Greek myths are to you, it's just part of my DNA and who I am. And I'm as much obsessed about my garden as I am about LinkedIn. And because of that, it does give me that little bit of point of difference. And I'd much rather have a point of difference that wasn't about a particular service that I offer. I would much rather that it was about something to do with me, who I am as a person, and what's important to me. Because I think that those sorts of things also emphasize your values, what's important to you as a person, not just what you do in your professional life. And because we're trying to build trust on LinkedIn for people to get to know you, they need to know what your values are. And I think that you and I both share different ways. We share the same values, but we present them in different ways. So we're sharing information, helping other people, but we just present it in different ways. You through your myths, and me through the gardening. So I can really see how that does stand out, and makes people in other states who don't remember your name say, do you know, he's the guy with the Greek myths, isn't he? And that's, that word of mouth, I think, is really, really important. Now, I would like you to tell us about your recent experience with LinkedIn, because when you and I were prepping for today's live, you told me what had happened in the last year or so. And I think that if you're open to this, that it would be a really, it's a story that people need to hear, Scott.
Yes.
So if you're prepared to share it with us, I'd love you to take the time to do that.
Thank you for asking that. I am. Before we go any further, though, I'm going to let everyone know that this story might be a little long at first, but it's for a point. It might be dark. In fact, it will be dark. But if you stick with us, I promise the light will fill your heart, and it will make you truly understand why showing up here on LinkedIn can be everything. Also, because I believe in being honest and authentic, I may get emotional during parts of this. But if we can't be who and what we are, if, like you just said, we can't be true to our values, what do we even exist for?
Exactly.
It was almost a year ago. Some of you, Sandra, who I believe is here, Mark Halbert, David Saphir know about this, but many people don't. A little more than a year ago, I woke up at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday night, and I felt as though an ice pick were stabbing at the base of my skull where it connects to my neck. I couldn't sleep that night. And at first I thought maybe I'd injured myself working out. And then I thought maybe I was sleeping on a bad pillow. Then I thought maybe it was a mattress. Over the next few days, symptom piled upon symptom. I lost control of my body temperature. I started having headaches. I started feeling aches all over my body. I went to urgent care. They kind of blew me off, gave me some aspirin or something, said I'd go to physical therapy. It was BS. And within 10 days, I had lost 20 pounds. I had stopped eating, and I was sleeping. When I say sleeping, I mean 16 hours, 20 hours. I later spoke to some medical people about what it means when you stop eating and drinking and when you start really sleeping. And what it meant was as frightening as it sounds. And I'm glad I didn't understand what was happening. You know, after I slept 20 hours, I had a dream that I will never forget as long as I live. I remember it as if it were real. I was walking through a series of mansions that were all attached to each other. And these mansions each had floor to ceiling bookshelves. And in each bookshelf, instead of books, there were baseball cards. And I was pulling out baseball cards one by one, and they were all the same. They each had big, bold letters that said, "Your number's up." And then it had my photo. The next morning, I woke up unable to walk or to stand. I was in and out of consciousness, rushed to the emergency room, and I found myself in the fight of my life. While I was there, I had this weird thing occur where if I turned my neck at all one way or the other, my nervous system, my upper back, my lower back, my pelvis, my thighs would go on fire. I'd involuntarily start to scream. And really, after test after test, after investigating everything in my life, the only thing the hospital doctors knew was that I had been infected by some sort of pathogen, but no one to this day knows what it was. Eventually, I started to be able to walk again. I was released, but I wasn't better. Now, during this period, as the hospital staff told me in no uncertain terms, if I had not been in such good physical shape, I would never have made it out of that hospital. And one of the most painful moments occurred when a client of mine came to visit me. And he later, I heard, went home and told his wife, Scott was lucid, but I don't know if he's coming out of there. I saw my business all but completely collapse. I couldn't bill my clients because, after all, I wasn't capable of doing anything for them. I couldn't even respond to texts. I had prospects in the pipeline, but as you could imagine, as hard-hearted as it might seem, most people are not willing to invest money working with a coach that they can't pay because he's not able to receive money and that might die any moment. Why would they spend money on that? Right. And so if it wasn't for a podcast that I was hosting, I would have had no money at all. I was gradually physically better. And for those of you who wonder, I'm completely physically recovered now, although no one knows why I recovered. I have no idea, but I am recovered. I was mentally recovered, but I was emotionally shattered. It's the only way to describe it. And a couple of things happened that goes as to authentic connection that I'll share with you. First of all, one of the first people, in fact, I think the first real meeting that I took one-on-one as I began to be well enough to feel like I could even sit in front of a microphone and have a conversation, and I still wasn't fully ambulatory, was with someone who was on this call, who we've talked about earlier, Mark Halpert. And I told him about everything that had happened. And I said, I don't even know where to begin coming back. I was just so out of it. I didn't even know how to approach returning after what had been at least a 2-month absence from this platform into what I'd been doing. I didn't know how I could say anything. Nothing else seemed to matter besides what had happened. And he said, tell your story, Scott, just like you would, Lynnaire. Tell your story. Keep it honest. Keep it real. And so I put together this series. I at first didn't know how long it was going to be. I just felt it was important to tell the story. It ended up being something that went on for a little over a month. And what I did was, between just static graphics and video, really heartfelt video, I talked about everything that had happened. It was hard for me to do that video because I had not gained any of that weight back. People told me that when they first saw me on that video, they were shocked. They're like, what on earth happened to him? Then they heard me and they could see the grief. I talked about that dream. And it was hard for me not to cry even during the video. And I look back on that video and you can see me choking up. I talked in the writing very vividly about how I was feeling, about the hopelessness and the despair. I didn't hold anything back. There was a picture. I was hooked up to the hospital beds. Like I said, I was in and out of consciousness during the first few days, not knowing anything, except I'd had a dream that seemed to predict that I was going to die. And my husband took a photo of me, drawn, gaunt, hooked up, asleep or unconscious or whatever, my hair all messy. I asked him why he took that picture, Lynnaire, and he said it was because I didn't know if I'd ever see you again. I put that picture up on LinkedIn. And those posts got more traction than anything. I did make sure that this wasn't just a pity party about Scott Mason. I learned things from this experience and I felt compelled to share that with the world. So every one of these things had a lesson that I would never have understood, but for the horror of what I'd been through. And people responded unlike anything I've ever had before or since. You could feel it. People were writing in the comments, I can't stop crying. Strangers who happened to see this on their feed reached out. I'm deeply affected by this. One of those people, by the way, who just reached out saying, yeah, I don't know you, but I read this. I'm fascinated by what you did with this. I would like to talk to you, please. Anyone that would write this, I need to know. Well, good for him that he did that, because I'm paying him to be my coach right now. Connecting to someone when they're in need and desperate, sincerely and genuine. He didn't even try and sell himself. I was on a Zoom call with him after we DM'd back and forth, and I knew he was my coach immediately. He was surprised at it, but he reached out. He showed that he cared. So that was one thing. And people to this day talk about that. They remember it. They may not remember any Greek myth that I tell, although many of them do, because I've asked for Greek myths to be retold as part of my feed. But They always remember what happened to me and that I was willing to share. They remember seeing it. They remember feeling the emotions. They remember what was put in the writing. Adrienne Miller, a woman that runs a 400 plus person networking group that has international members, recently said, there's no way in heck ChatGPT could have written about what Scott went through. It couldn't have, let alone the lessons that he took from it that were metaphysical and tied to business. Number one. Number two, like I said, my business collapsed. I didn't know if I didn't know what I was going to do. I was afraid. I remember my first full walking excursion once I got home was to Target, but I was afraid to spend money on peanut butter because I didn't know if I would have the money for it. That would send my bank account into overdraft. And people that I knew on LinkedIn, once they heard about what happened, they galvanized. There was a whole LinkedIn group that was formed, and the person who formed it, her name is Summer Watson. Summer Watson. Her name needs to be remembered forever. She went through every last mutual connection that she could find that we had. She also, I think, connected some people in my National Speakers Association chapter and put them in this special group. And she said, this is what's happening with Scott. And she said, he's desperate. He needs help. And people gave. Not only that, it wasn't just the people that I knew and had been working with. There were people who there's people that you their first degree connections, and you have like thousands of connections. You're like, I don't know you. You just showed up as a connection, and you've never commented on a post that I have. I've never commented on a post you've had. We've never had a conversation. There were people that she included in this group simply because she didn't know who was a first degree connection and who wasn't. Some of those people gave money. All I needed to know, they said, was that Summer said someone here on LinkedIn in our family was in dire straits. And they did. And they sent messages too. And I'll tell you this, when you talk about connection, when you talk about willingness to do something for someone, none of those people, what they did will ever be forgotten by me. And whatever I can do for them, I will. And, Lynnaire, in business, it's so easy to secretly suspect that people only care about you because they think that you can do something for them. Scott knows someone that can help me. Scott can speak at my event. Scott might be my client. And pitch slappers don't help. Sitting in that hospital bed, sick, not knowing if I'd make it out, if I did, not knowing if I'd be able to walk again, if my entire set of dreams about being a speaker had just ended, I was like, what if everyone abandons me? What if everyone just thinks that I'm a business transaction or possible business transaction or a connection and not a human being? And I find out this horrible truth, and here I am, and all these connections that I had just disappear. And I tell people what I learned, which is that on LinkedIn, love is alive and well. It really is. And that's something I want people to hear tonight too.
On LinkedIn, love is alive and well.
Yes.
I absolutely agree. I'm just going to take a moment here because you're not the only one who's feeling a little emotional right this moment. I'll tell you what I'll do while I'm taking a moment. I will just she's put something up there. Let me just put this up on the screen and you can have a think about that while I'm just taking a wee moment here. So this is sometimes when people join an event like this, Scott, you probably know this, depending on their settings, they don't show up as their actual name. They just show up as a LinkedIn user. That might be because they're a second degree connection to both of us or to me. And so we don't actually know who it is who has put the question up there. So it seems a little bit discordant to go directly from what you were talking about and sharing something that was so personal and so important. And dare I say it, just a fabulous example of charisma in the way that you told the story, is to actually go from that to asking about a business question with LinkedIn.
Yes.
But I would like to cover this for this person, if that would be all right with you.
Yes. So what suggestions do I have for using charisma to guide people to buying our services, especially when we are passionate about their benefits? First of all, think carefully about what the benefit is, not just from an abstract perspective, like you will get more business, but from a story perspective. I use Greek myths as a leadership and a charismatic development allegory because they are fundamentally rooted in stories that have spoken to, on a primal level, the human condition for thousands of years. Some of these Greek myths, we believe, may be 6,000 years old. That's the staying power of some of these stories. And so when you think about that, that's the way an idea can be communicated. So always tie in the value or the outcome of your goods or services to a story, ideally regarding a client. But if it's a new product and you don't have a client or a customer to talk about, then you can even use a hypothetical story. Make sure then that when you're telling that story, number one, that you're not the hero of it. You might be the person that provides the thing that is the hero, but that you're not the hero of it. But make sure that you give that story the appropriate emotional weight. So you don't want to say, for instance, after I worked with Sandra Connor, who is on here, who is a video marketer, my client saw their sales go up and they were really happy because they were able to take their business to the next level. Don't say that. Say, Carlene was in desperate straits and she spent her last money on Sandra because she knew she had to shake something up. And she had heard by watching and listening to and working with Lynnaire previously that video was the way to make herself known on LinkedIn. And she was afraid. But Sandra worked with her. Sandra got her to be comfortable. Sandra had all these takes of her various pitches and was able to craft them into something. And you know what? Carlene started getting those videos out and people were moved and they came to Carlene. And today, Carlene just bought her Lamborghini or just paid the last in advance payment of her daughter's college tuition, right? Tell it in an arc, but tell it with real feeling. People don't hear things like, oh, my client's business got better. Oh, they got more revenue. Even percentages and data, a certain percentage of the population, let's say 10, 20% of this percent of them will be moved by data. But most people, data just goes right over their head, or they're like, well, they had a 10% revenue increase. Okay, now were they making $5 a year? Right? No, but if you talk about how they felt, and then if you show your feeling about how it felt, if your client's story leads to success, be the herald of that client's triumph. Be the person holding the trumpet and shouting their and ringing out their enunciation into their place of glory. That's what you as a provider of the services need to do. And then, by the way, close it out by connecting that story to the person who's listening. And you, Lynnaire, you're already making $10 million a year, right? Coaching people on LinkedIn. But But if so-and-so got a 10% increase, hey, and you invested XYZ $1,000 in Sandra K. Connor, well, wouldn't it be nice to get that extra 10% of revenue, that extra million? Hey, you might be able to buy a new house with it. And right, just connect with the person. Think about when you're telling the story, looking them in the eye, but don't do it in a way that's creepy. If you get nervous about staring someone in the eye, a charismatic tip is to sometimes look a little bit to their left or to their right, not quite at the eye, but near it. If you're on video, make sure that you're looking at the camera, not at the screen, so that it appears as though you're looking at them. Make sure that your eye line is appropriately placed, that you're not talking like this, right? Or talking like this, but make sure that you're coming from a position of authority so that they're able to see all of the expression, be all of those things, but make sure that above all else, you're conveying that passion appropriately. One thing that's big that I share with people is that, because you don't want to be performative either. Hey, I can be over dramatic and fake. I hate it because that's not who I am, but I can do it. But everyone hates it. It's irritating. So one thing that you might want to consider is to take a few minutes before you have such a conversation. Close your eyes. This sounds woo-woo, but literally think about the conversation, what feelings it evokes. Have that moment of peace. Once you've had those emotions begin to bubble up in you, then you go and talk with those. And you'll be surprised at the impact that can have.
When I messaged you this morning, Scott, I said to you that not only that I was looking forward to our conversation today, but I didn't think that I would end the day the same person as I began the day. And I absolutely think that that's what has happened, that you've delivered some amazing messages today that we all need to hear. And that clearly from the comments, that I can see that other people have felt that you have more than delivered, that you have really gone the extra distance and shared not only a personal story that was really important to you, but how you felt about it, which is exactly where we really need to be on LinkedIn, because people often say, oh, it's getting like Facebook, or people are talking about personal stuff, but that's what we all want to see. We all want to know about the people that we are in communication with, that we may decide to do business with. And if we don't know much about them as a person or as people, then we are less inclined. We don't have that connection. And to me, LinkedIn is all about the connection. It's the friendships that you build here, the relationships that you have. We've already talked about Mark Halpert several times, and he's a really prime example, and somebody that both you and I know as friends. I've never met Mark, and I'm unlikely to ever meet Mark, but I consider him one of my closest LinkedIn friends, and that won't change because of all of the different kinds of things that we've shared and the trust that we have built together. And it is possible to do on LinkedIn, and I believe that that's one of LinkedIn's major powers, is the power to be able to bring people together so that they do exactly what they did for you when you were unwell, and that they came together and they provided support in different ways. That has clearly resonated with you and made a big impact on you and on your life in material ways, but also on your mental health and other aspects too. So I just think that was an amazing story to share with us. I just going to ask Cher if she would put on the screen some of the links that we have for you, because I'd like you briefly just to tell us what you can offer people and the different ways that you help them. You mentioned you've got a book series coming out, and I'm really looking forward to reading that. And because that sounds like a really interesting combination of things. And so people can go to your website. What will they find on your website?
First of all, they'll get to see that hover bike with your homeboy flying around on it. But really what they will get is a description of how my transformative services can help them. They'll get an outline of my program. They'll get a sense as to what pain point it resolves. They'll get a sense of the human being behind all of this. They'll also be able to subscribe to my blog. And I have leadership insights that are published every other week or so. They're shared here on LinkedIn as well. But if you want to be the first to get at them, then you'll be able to receive them there. And you also have access to a complimentary assessment that I really believe helps people identify professionally where they're stuck, whether it's vis-a-vis charisma or whether it's vis-a-vis other personal myths that they're telling themselves that are keeping them from fully stepping into their greatness. And that assessment might be able to help you begin to take some steps on your own to change your life and become transformed and a leader or a presence in the world worthy of Mount Olympus.
Worthy of Mount Olympus. Fantastic. I just put a comment or a note up from Joanne Funch, who's also another close LinkedIn friend of mine. In fact, Joanne was the first person on LinkedIn who was in my industry who reached out to me on a personal level. And do you know how she did that, Scott? She did that through a video. A video that was not mass produced, that was individual to me. And because of that, we've become friends, and every 2 or 3 months we have a natter about LinkedIn and learn a lot from each other. And that's the kind of peer support I think that you can get on LinkedIn as well. All right, so what last tips would you like to leave us with today?
Don't be afraid to be bold. And if you're worried about how people will judge you, look, I host a podcast about psychedelics. I was concerned about putting things up about that on LinkedIn, webdelics.com. Thank you for putting that up. It's basically the #1 resource for information that's credible and scientifically vetted and human-centric with regards to these plant medicines. Again, would people reject me? Would I get banished? Would people think I'm a freak? Or would people feel more connected to me than ever? Would the people that needed that be able to find it and understand that there really is a human being here? Yes, if we care about helping other people, which is hopefully why we're in business, yeah, we need to make a living and all that, but we want to make a living in one way or another, providing something of use to the world, well, then being bold about it, even if you're afraid, is the way to go.
Be bold and don't be afraid.
Yes.
And love is alive and well on LinkedIn. Some fabulous phrases here. Scott, thank you so much. I really don't want this conversation to end, but I do understand that people have things to do, places to go, people to see. So we will have to wrap this up. I really so appreciate being back in touch with you again. And thank you for joining us. A quick shout out to Meryl Cass, who was always on our events and make sure everybody knows about our events. So thank you to him for making sure so many people came and saw us today and had a listen to the fabulous messages that you had to share. So thank you. I suspect that it won't be quite so long before you and I are back in touch again.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, wherever in the world you have been. We hope you have found this interesting, that you have learned something, and that you have been entertained by a charismatic man at the same time. We really appreciate your being here today. Next week, we have an audio event for you at the same time at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, New Zealand time. That'll be 9 p.m. Eastern time too. So thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you have had a fascinating time with us. Thank you, Scott, and bye for now, everyone.